All right, everybody. Here are the updates for the Q&A of the of the SnyderCon Day 2. Right after the Batman vs. Superman Ultimate Edition ended, they did start the Q&A. Now, I missed the very beginning of it because I was actually helping my wife do something, and when I came back up, it was, it had already started. But the way it ended was freaking hilarious, and it was a major dig at Warner Brothers and the studio. And I'm going to talk about that at the end. Now, there wasn't a whole lot of juicy stuff that came out of this, but he did give more clarification on the scene that I talked about in the first update of the water and the bathtub with Superman and Lois. So I'm going to kind of read, some of the notes that I took here. So, someone asked about cutting Batman versus Superman at the behest of the studio, and Zack said he was just grateful that he was able to release the Ultimate Edition simply because the studios are the ones who invest the money. Well, there are investors that invest in the studios, and the studios make the movies, and that the studios own these IPs. And he's just grateful that this edition of the movie even exists. Somebody asked him about the open pod, and this gets interesting. Everyone assumed that it was going to be Kara, and that may have been where they were going to go, here in the future, but he said that's not what the real plan was. Originally, they were going to make, he talked about where the gods came from in Greek mythology, and they were actually tied to Kryptonians, and that Zeus was going to be a Kryptonian, and he was going to have that tie to Wonder Woman, and that Ares was actually the one that caused the Kryptonian ship to crash land on Earth in the first place. And the whole point of the storyline was to show where the gods actually came from, and that they actually had Kryptonian history, which was kind of interesting. But the studio, he said that was a plan that never came to fruition. The studio basically wasn't going to let them do that. Somebody asked about the Joker, being tied to Batman at the end of Zack Snyder's Justice League, which I'm surprised this wasn't brought up, or wasn't going to be brought up, tomorrow at that one. But he talked about that scene and how the Joker had basically made a deal with Batman and basically had a way to kill Superman that only the Joker knew, and that he's the only one that could help him. And so Batman knew the risks but was willing to take it to take down Superman. They kind of made a joke about the R rating on the film, the Ultimate Edition. And this is one of the things I noticed when the film first got released. Saw it at the theater. It did feel somewhat disjointed, but I was able to follow the story. And I knew when they did the nightmare sequence that there was going to be way more to come, down the line. And it was interesting that as soon as the movie got released in theaters, the next day, Warner Brothers released the scene of Lex going into the ship, talking with Steppenwolf, and you realize there was more to the story, and that should have never been cut out of the film. And then it was like a couple days later where they announced the Steelbook edition and the actual Ultimate Edition of Batman vs. Superman being released on video, and that it was going to have a bunch more scenes in it, and it was rated R. Now, usually movies that are extended when they come out on video don't have a rating. This one already had a rating, and it was the version that was supposed to come out in theaters, but the studios made them cut it to get more butts in the seats, which obviously nobody prefers that version. They want the extended version. And the MPAA kept making it an R rating. And first they said it was too violent. So he went so far as to take out the blood. There's the one scene in the warehouse scene with Batman, going after all those henchmen, and there where he kind of throws the crate and it hits the guy and his head hits the wall and there's blood on the wall. They took out all the blood and everything, and then at the end of the day, the MPAA came back and said, well, it's just because Batman's mean to Superman. And he kind of joked about it and said, it's kind of in the title. That's kind of the story of the movie. And they just didn't like that, showing that no matter what they were going to do with this film, they were going to give it an R rating if they kept that version of the film. Somebody asked about an early idea of Metallo being a part of the film, and they said way early on that Scoot McNairy, the guy at the beginning who had his legs, were going to have to be amputated because they got stuck under the building. that character was actually going to be Metallo in a whole different version of the film. But that was the original plan, but that got changed, definitely got changed, as time went on. Now, the last question, there's one more that was brought up afterwards, but supposedly the last question was going to be, were they ever going to, because Zach did Watchmen, were they ever going to have that crossover with the Doomsday Clock story? And Zach kind of nodded his head, and they asked him about that. And someone said, isn't that the story that was written by Jeff Johns? And he said, that's when Zack Snyder said, yeah, probably not. Probably not. And everybody started to laugh. And it was definitely a knock on the studio on what had happened when they brought Jeff Johns in. And Jeff Johns was basically the mastermind, that changed everything. Him with Hamada and everything, they just decided to blow everything up. And that's when he got basically shoved to the side. And so he was making it very clear that he would never develop basically a story written by Jeff Johns at this stage, which is understandable. And then that's when they kind of elaborated on that scene that I was talking about in the last one, and he didn't really clarify in the question and answers, not the question and answer session, but during the live stream. And he said, somebody asked about there being more scenes for Batman versus Superman, make it, even longer. And he said the biggest thing that was cut, he said, and they had a lot of footage on this, was the scene where Clark and Lois would dump water onto the floor. It would seep down into the apartment below them, and there was this woman, a really nasty woman, who kept hitting her, her thing on her roof going into their apartment, telling them to knock it off. And he goes down there to fix everything, and because it kept happening a lot between him and Lois, where the water would spill over, and they kind of made a joke about that, and it was kind of funny. But he said they actually filmed quite a bit of material to have that woman in the movie, but it just never made it in, which is understandable. I don't think that would have really added a lot to the film, but it's kind of funny that that's where a lot of the footage that they would have used for extra scenes actually came from. All right, so there's the update for this one. Tomorrow, I do not know if I'm going to watch the whole 4-hour Justice League and, do the Q&A. I'm hoping I can. And then I will also be there for the Q&A afterwards. So the live stream and the Q&A, I'm going to try to be there for the first part, may or may not. But I will definitely be there for the Q&A, and I'm looking forward to seeing who these special guests might be tomorrow. I'm hoping something is going to happen. I'm not getting my hopes up, though. Like, I'm not expecting something big to happen tomorrow, but I'm hoping something big happens tomorrow. There have been a few hints that eventually this story is going to get told and that they will finish up the whole Zack Snyder storyline. Does that mean it's going to be announced tomorrow? I don't know. And a lot of people, somebody was telling me that I've hyped this whole thing up, that this was going to be the return of the SnyderVerse, and I never have. I've never said that. In fact, I've made it very clear on my channel that, number one, I'm not a scooper. And number two, that these are things that I hope to happen, but I don't have any insight as to what they're going to do at the SnyderCon. And I've told people I do not expect anything big to happen, but I'm hoping something big happens. So nobody can come after me for saying one thing and doing another. The one thing you're going to find about me on my channel is I'm going to be very honest with my thoughts, my feelings. I'm never going to lie, and I'm never going to steer people in a direction and go somewhere else. That's how you lose subscribers. You lose the faith of the people that follow you. And that is not my goal here. I want to build a channel where people can come here and get honest information and trust what they're being told, and that they'll go along with me on this journey. And as far as Gunn goes, I don't like Gunn for several reasons, okay? People say I'm so anti-Gunn. And yeah, I have reasons for that. And I've laid these out before. Number one, I've already seen two projects by him. Suicide Squad and also Peacemaker. I do not want my DC Universe being modeled after stuff that he's done like that. I think they're disrespectful. I think they're it's got adolescent humor, disgusting humor. It's for the lowest common denominator. And that's how I see those projects. And that's just how it is. And I don't want that guy in charge of the DC Universe. His Superman movie is going to be a big tell. He's got one opportunity. If that doesn't end up well, it's going to be over for sure, and they will go to Plan B. I guarantee you that. We'll probably get to the Superman release, but if it doesn't do well, I guarantee you Zaslav is going to put in Plan B. So we've got a lot of things coming up. We've got the rest of the SnyderCon tomorrow, which I will be reporting on, and then we do have, the Flash coming up in less than 2 months now, and I'm going to be covering everything DC. So I do videos pretty much daily. If you haven't already, please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and you will be notified as I have new videos go up.